Leona Helmsley was called the Queen of Mean.
Leona Helmsley was the biggest, B-I-T-C-H.
A reputation for not being a very nice lady, and she made it to the top of the real estate world in New York in the 80s.
Leona Helmsley was all about control, and she did this even from the grave.
Leona Helmsley passes away, and now the whole family wonders who's going to get her billions.
Except as far as Leona was concerned, it wasn't going to go to her grandchildren. She disinherited both of them in her will.
She writes in her will, "You two get nothing, and you know why."
It was cruel and it was crazy. There was one stroke of generosity in Leona's will, $12 million for trouble.
This woman is a piece of work.
I mean, she gave $12 million to her dog, but disinherited 2 of her grandchildren. And there were many lawsuits after that.
That is how she earned her title of being the Queen of Mean.
When a celebrity checks out, there's no shortage of people ready to cash in. There's a ton of money to be made on the backs of dead celebrities, and with millions of dollars at stake, the battles over the estates of the rich and famous can lead to some serious drama. This is the story of how the notorious Queen of Mean, Leona Helmsley, created an enormous real estate empire worth billions of dollars, and the scandals and battles over her money that would continue long after her death. When Leona Helmsley passes away in 2007, her net worth is estimated to be over the unbelievable sum of $4.8 billion.
By the time of Leona Helmsley's death in 2007, she was largely forgotten as a public figure, but she still retained her enormous wealth.
Leona's estate is comprised of a sprawling 28-room mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, valued at $65 million in 2014. A 9-room penthouse with a swimming pool and a private hair salon overlooking Central Park atop her hotel, the Park Lane. A condo in Palm Beach, Florida. A mountaintop hideaway near Phoenix, Arizona. And a 100-seat jet with a bedroom suite. Her closets were stuffed with hundreds of evening gowns and an extensive shoe collection, including 200 identical pairs of Italian designer flats that cost more than $200 a pair, or $40,000 for the entire collection.
Looking fabulous was her #1 priority.
As for her business holdings, at one time the Helmsley Corporation boasted as many as 125 properties in New York and around the U.S., including 27 hotels bearing the Helmsley name, Manhattan skyscrapers, warehouses, residential lofts and landmark Manhattan buildings, the Gray Bar Building, the Flatiron Building, and the iconic Empire State Building. With such a huge fortune on the line, the media is eager with speculation of who will get what. When Leona's final will goes public, it causes a massive uproar.
There is no end to how mean, how nasty, how controlling, and how clear Leona would be about her power. When you look at the will and the terms of this will, is we see the Queen of Mean exercising her control and her need for power from the grave.
Leona leaves her chauffeur $100,000 and bequeaths her brother Alvin Rosenthal and 2 grandsons, Walter and David Panzier, millions. She has also assigned them as executors of her charitable trust, which will constitute a bulk of her massive fortune. A trust whose mission statement indicates it's for provision of care for dogs. But tongues really start wagging when it's revealed who is the biggest beneficiary. Her 7-year-old pet dog, Trouble.
She wanted to make sure her dog, Trouble, had everything it needed during the rest of her dog's lifetime, so that's why she left the $12 million.
It is a lot of money to be leaving to a dog, but if you think about it, Trouble never talked back, and Trouble never had an opinion.
The news that Trouble has become the richest dog in the world has the media in a tizzy. But even more jaw-dropping is who Leona Helmsley specifically leaves out of her will. Her 2 grandchildren.
Craig and Megan got nothing.
I mean, what could you have done that was so wrong that your grandmother would leave more money to her dog than to you?
In the will, she said, they know why.
Actually didn't know why. Contrary to what Leona thought, those two grandchildren go on to question the fact that they were left with nothing and fight it in court.
Helmsley's controversial final wishes will launch an epic dogfight between the executors, her grandchildren, and 3 animal rights charities to get what they believe is rightfully theirs.
It's almost like reality is crazier than what you could create on TV.
But how exactly did the Queen of Mean earn her notorious title and accumulate her billions of wealth?
In a way, Leona Helmsley lived a Cinderella story. The problem was that Leona didn't bring any grace to the role. She was the bitchy Cinderella.
From an early age, Leona Helmsley was certain she was destined for greatness and was prepared to do whatever it took to achieve it.
She was a ruthless business person, and when you're ruthless like that, sometimes people like that do make it to the top.
Leona Mindy Rosenthal is born on July 4th, 1920, outside New York City. Her father is a hat maker and is struggling to support his family financially. As soon as she is old enough, Leona takes control of her destiny.
She had grown up in tough circumstances. She knew what it meant to struggle, and she did not want that ever again in her life.
Leona Rosenthal becomes Leona Roberts and gets married and divorced twice by the time she enters her 30s. By 1968, Leona is a single mother to a son. She uses her well-endowed tenacity and street smarts to help make ends meet. But to turn her life around, Leona bravely decides to enter the notoriously tough, male-dominated world of New York City real estate.
Leona Helmsley was definitely good at getting what she wanted, even if she had to lie to do it. In order to get her first job in a real estate company as a secretary, she not only lied about her age, but she also presented a bogus resume.
Leona moves up the ladder quickly, going from secretary to real estate broker.
The real estate industry is a place that doesn't matter so much what your fancy degrees are, doesn't matter what your background is. What matters is what you can sell, and boy, Leona could sell.
She ended up brokering the first sale of a New York condominium, which was almost unheard of at the time.
In 1968, Leona establishes her own real estate firm.
She was a trailblazer. Leona claims that she made $688,500 in the first 3 months that she opened her real estate firm. That's unbelievable.
But Leona isn't satisfied yet. She goes looking for her ticket to the major leagues of New York real estate power brokers. And in 1969, she finds him.
There are several stories about how Harry and Leona met. To hear Leona tell it, he had heard of her reputation, and he asked one of her associates to call her, to get her on the phone, to hire her away, to which her reply was, "You can't afford me." The real story, as far as most people are concerned, is that she turned up looking really good at a party that he had thrown, and she sashayed across the room, isolated him, and pretty much never left his side after that.
He was not the best looking guy in the world. He was not the most glamorous guy in the world. But boy, he knew how to make money. And Leona Helmsley understood that teaming up with Harry, they could do an awful lot together.
Leona soon charms Harry into a major position within his company.
Leona Helmsley was offered a job as vice president of one of Harry's real estate companies at a salary of over $750,000. That's a very attractive salary during that time period.
Despite Harry's personal situation, his relationship with Leona goes quickly from business to pleasure.
Harry was married when he met Leona Helmsley, but he was smitten with her.
By 1972, Leona gets rid of her competition when Harry files for divorce from his wife of 33 years.
It cost Harry Helmsley $7 million to get out of his first marriage.
Leona and Harry soon get married in their brand new $1 million penthouse suite atop Harry's recently acquired hotel, the Park Lane.
The Park Lane penthouse is on Central Park South, and it goes back to 58th Street. And it was lavish, unspeakably lavish. Living room on 2 floors, an indoor swimming pool, views in all directions up Central Park, beautiful.
And this was essentially their private home.
Despite his wealth, before he met Leona, Harry lived a fairly frugal life. But she soon changes all that. Leona renovates their penthouse and the Helmsleys start to live large.
His lifestyle took an enormous upward tick.
It wasn't enough to buy a $4 million private jet. They had to gold plate the buckles on the seat belts, install beautiful wood paneling, and turn that airplane really into a flying palace.
Leona and Harry Helmsley are seen as the Big Apple's new king and queen.
Leona Helmsley and Harry Helmsley were in some ways the toast of New York City, even though they weren't liked. Why were they revered? Because they were billionaires.
Leona Helmsley has risen from poverty to achieve her dream of becoming rich and now famous, and she embraces it wholeheartedly.
She was extremely vain. Every day when Harry would go to the office, she would have her private hairdresser come, do her hair, do her nails. She would swim laps in the pool, and when she went around, she would have a hotel employee waiting with a platter of shrimp so she could reward herself and take 1 shrimp every time.
Leona is rich and powerful, and she makes sure no one ever forgets it.
You didn't want to get on her bad side. The littlest things could set off Leona Helmsley.
It will be that very attitude that will ultimately be her undoing. When Leona Helmsley died in 2007, her massive fortune was literally set to go to the dogs. The real estate mogul and hotelier had left the bulk of her $5 billion fortune in trust to charities devoted to the care of canines. She also leaves $12 million to her pet dog, Trouble, while disinheriting 2 of her 4 grandchildren.
It's no surprise that Trouble was trouble. She was known to bite people when she didn't get what she wanted.
Even her 2 grandchildren, Walter and David, who did stand to inherit, wouldn't get a dime if they didn't follow Leona's rules.
She ended up leaving $10 million to 2 of her grandchildren, assuming that they visited her son's grave at least once a year.
While the scorned grandchildren, Megan and Craig Panzerer, gear up to fight Trouble for a scrap of Leona's fortune, the media eagerly covers each new development. Meanwhile, back in 1980, Leona Helmsley and her real estate magnate husband, Harry, are mainstays of the tabloid press.
There was always some scandal, some firing, something ugly going on around Leona Helmsley, yet she seemed to not care.
Everything Leona does is to bolster the Helmsley name and reputation. One method is by throwing one of the most extravagant soirees of the New York social scene, Harry's birthday party.
At these crazy parties, there was champagne, there was caviar, gardenias in the pool, and as if the evening couldn't be topped, there was a 16-piece orchestra, and balloons would fall from the ceiling at midnight.
The 200 or so guests are a who's who of upper-class society, like the Rockefellers and other bigwig real estate developers. But there is one prominent exception.
You know who wasn't on the guest list? Donald Trump. Very complicated relationship between the Trumps and the Helmsleys.
Leona Helmsley and her husband were bitter rivals of Donald Trump. They were both trying to be the king of the real estate world in New York.
Years later, when Donald Trump tries to muscle in on the Helmsley territory, Leona's claws come out.
Leona and the Donald hated each other. They were constantly trying to one-up the other, sweeping the other person's leg. And the best part about it is they were very vocal in the public eye.
But back in 1974, Harry is still the undisputed king of Manhattan real estate. By 1980, the Helmsleys have acquired 3 luxury hotels in Manhattan and a Midwestern motel chain. When Harry names Leona president of the Helmsley Hotels, they launch her reign with an ingenious advertising campaign that would feature none other than Leona herself. It was on the advice of her public relations consultant.
Howard Rubenstein gave the Helmsleys what turned out to be brilliant advice: to use Leona's rough edges as a marketing method taking what could be a huge negative and turning it into a positive.
Leona Helmsley had a reputation for being the queen of mean. That's true. But she also had a reputation for excellence.
She would be wearing a tiara, and she would hold up skimpy towels and say, "I won't settle for skimpy towels. Why should you?"
This marketing campaign of having Leona being the face of the hotels, it actually completely worked.
Making the Queen of Mean synonymous with the Helmsley Hotel brand is hailed as a new chapter in U.S. hotel marketing by the advertising industry. It will earn Leona and Harry untold millions.
And in fact, because of her branding, occupancy increased from 25 to 87%. Hotels prior to this really didn't have personalities, but the Helmsley Hotel did.
Introducing the idea that the brand owner can become the brand itself was highly influential. It's later emulated by many other successful real estate moguls in America. While guests of the Helmsley Hotel chain were treated to the best, those who actually worked for Leona Helmsley often experienced the worst.
Leona was a tyrant to work for. And as a reporter, we constantly heard stories from employees complaining about her abusive treatment, yelling at a room keeper, firing a waiter on the spot when a water glass wasn't filled.
Nobody is safe from the Queen of Mean, not even her own family. In 1982, Leona is blindsided by the sudden death of her son, Jay Panzerer. Jay had 4 children, Megan, Craig, Walter, and David from previous marriages. At the time, he was married to his 3rd wife, Mimi, who would end up going head-to-head with Leona in an ugly estate battle.
Initially, having Leona as a mother-in-law was sweet, pleasant, and fun. And then Leona's only son, Jay, passes away. And that is when the evil mother-in-law comes out. Jay's widow says that at the New York funeral, Leona approaches her and says, "I will destroy you," and then turns to her 14-year-old grandson, Craig, and says, "You killed your father. No one is immune."
When Mimi and Craig return to Orlando, they get an eviction notice. The home they are living in belongs to the Helmsley Company, and Leona wants them out. And even worse, Leona Helmsley would go on to sue her son's widow for $1,400 for moving her son Jay's casket from Florida to New York.
It was cruel, and it was crazy, and it was unnecessary, and Harry went along with every single inch of it.
It wouldn't be the last lawsuit Leona files against Mimi.
Leona goes after Jay's widow, Mimi, for $100,000, asking for a repayment for a loan that her son took from her.
No suit was more personal than the suit she filed against her own daughter-in-law after her son had died over an 18-carat ring that she claimed was her property.
But the daughter-in-law has the guts to fight fire with fire.
In court, they brought out a newspaper clipping showing that Leona Helmsley had publicly given this ring to her daughter at one of her grandchildren's bar mitzvahs.
Mimi beats Leona in court, but after paying her lawyers and repaying the Helmsley Company nearly $50,000 that Jay had received, Mimi has nearly nothing left. But not Leona. A year after Jay's death, she and Harry spend millions on a new home.
This wasn't just any home. This was a 25,000 square foot mansion. And they needed only the best for this mansion, including painters who spent over a year painting the home, cabinet makers.
Within a few months, Leona is slapped with a lawsuit from a Bronx cabinet maker, claiming she refused to pay the $12,050 owed to him.
And there were many lawsuits after that. Leona Helmsley actually said to the painter who spent a year of his life painting their home that he had the privilege of painting their home. It was like a commission, so he really didn't need to get paid.
What the Helmsleys didn't bargain for was that the contractors would call them out.
They take their story to the newspapers.
Papers went into a frenzy. People in New York called Leona the Queen of Mean. And so what started out as a smattering of small business complaints, playing into the reputation that Leona already had, really ended up becoming her undoing.
Everything begins to fall apart when it's revealed that Leona and Harry Helmsley had been playing fast and loose with their personal bookkeeping for years.
Leona would hire contractors to do work on the house in Greenwich, Connecticut, but have them write out the invoices for work at hotel properties. This way, they were paying for stuff done and work done in their house with business money. That's illegal. That's fraudulent.
Some of the personal expenses they charged to their various businesses were a $45,000 silver clock for Harry's 74th birthday, a $210,000 mahogany table, $290,000 in other furnishings, a $130,000 sound system, $500,000 worth of jade art, $370,000 for landscaping costs, and approximately $1.825 million for miscellaneous antiques and other home decor items. This came to a grand total of $3.37 million.
They even tried to write off Leona's bras and panties as hotel uniforms.
I just don't think she could bring herself to pay for the things that ordinary people had to pay for, because after all, she was Leona Helmsley. She was not an ordinary person.
On April 4th, 1988, Leona and Harry Helmsley are charged with evading more than $4 million in income taxes from 1983 to 1985.
When Leona Helmsley is charged with tax evasion and fraud, it sets up a trial unlike the city has ever seen. It was a total media circus.
During the 1980s and 1990s, the Queen of Mean, Leona Helmsley, dominated the gossip columns. The billionaire real estate tycoon's outrageous antics and scandals were perfect tabloid fodder. People just loved to hate Leona, especially when she is charged with tax evasion in 1988.
This is the opposite of the kind of press that Leona Helmsley wants.
During that time period, Leona Helmsley has a very public run-in with her arch nemesis, Donald Trump.
In a lot of ways, Trump was the mirror image of Leona Helmsley. He was a self-made personality. They competed over properties, and they competed for attention in the press.
There were disputes in Atlantic City. Donald was entering the casino business and had his eye on a small parcel next to the boardwalk that he needed to build one of his beachfront hotels. And the Helmsleys own that.
Outraged that Leona isn't giving him what he wants, Donald Trump writes a scathing letter to the Helmsleys, and it's conveniently leaked to the New York Post.
In the letter, he calls her a disgrace to the industry, a disgrace to humanity, and accuses her of ruining his friend Harry's reputation.
In the end, Leona agrees to sell. But rather than selling to Trump directly, she brokers a third-party deal. She also takes a shot at Trump personally in a Playboy article.
She calls him a snake. She calls him a liar, and she wouldn't believe a word that Donald Trump would say, even if his tongue was notarized.
In 1989, the Helmsley trial officially begins. Harry's health has been steadily deteriorating, and he is found unfit to stand trial by the court.
But Leona is competent to stand trial. She pleads not guilty, and there is a full trial.
The trial is frequently front-page news, and spectators line up outside the courthouse to catch a glimpse of the Queen of Mean.
The amount of coverage that was given to the Helmsley trial is not unlike that of Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein. This was the biggest news, and people wanted her to go down.
The prosecutors rake Leona over the coals as witness after witness takes the stand.
One of her former housekeepers tells the infamous quote, "We don't pay taxes, the little people pay taxes." Now, if that does not smell of Marie Antoinette to the French people, let them eat cake. I don't know what does.
On August 30th, 1989, Leona Helmsley is found guilty. Overcome by the decision, she collapses outside the courtroom.
Leona Helmsley did go down. She was convicted of several counts of tax fraud and tax evasion. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and tons of fines. Millions and millions and millions of dollars of fines that she had to pay back.
After a failed appeal, Leona Helmsley is ordered to report to prison on tax day, April 15th, 1992.
This is not home arrest. This is not you can stay in your beautiful house in Greenwich. This is not that you're living in a penthouse in Manhattan. This is in a federal penitentiary 18 months. That is not what Leona Helmsley ever thought was going to happen to her in her life.
But not surprising, while in prison, Leona adapts and even thrives.
Jail didn't change Leona at all because she felt that she was above the law. She was making deals with other inmates for them to do her own housekeeping.
She pays another inmate to clean her cell and make sure that, to whatever extent possible, she's getting not Helmsley Hotel quality service, but something to ease the time a little bit.
After serving 18 months, Leona is released from prison and is expected to serve 750 hours of community service. But in 1995, she's hauled back to court again. For failing to meet her parole obligations.
They find out that she is paying an employee to do her service hours. They slap on another 150 service hours for her to complete. This woman never learns.
Leona gets into a tussle with her old rival, Donald Trump, when he attempts a hostile takeover of the biggest jewel in the Helmsley real estate crown.
The Empire State Building was not just a building, it was an icon, it was a brand. And I think the Helmsleys had not run it as the kind of property, as the jewel that he thought that it was.
The bottom line was that Donald owned a share of the Empire State Building, but Leona was in charge of managing it. And so they began getting into disputes about whether the building was managed properly.
Donald Trump owns a large stake in the building, and in the late 1990s, he sues the other leaseholders, including the Helmsleys, in a bid to seize controlling interest.
Okay, any other questions? Is that it?
Who really owns the Empire State Building?
I do.
The battle over the Empire State Building was kind of symbolic for the battle between Trump and the Helmsleys. It was about status, it was about power, it was about controlling, and it was also about who was the biggest real estate mogul in New York City.
That's what led to a lot of the bad blood between them and a lot of the nasty words that were exchanged between the two sides.
Trump launches a smear campaign against Leona about the state of the New York landmark, but she isn't about to back down.
Donald described it as dirty, run down. There were mice running through it. Yet, he wanted to take it over and offered Leona to buy her out. To which she said, "No, I don't think so."
The showdown between Leona Helmsley and Donald Trump over the iconic building goes before the courts in 1999, and Leona comes out on top.
The judge ended up saying his complaints were totally unfounded.
Years later, on the heels of his third corporate bankruptcy, Trump would end up selling his entire stake back to Helmsley for $57.5 million. In January 1997, after suffering ill health for some time, Harry Helmsley dies in a hospital with Leona at his side. He was 87 years old. In her statement to the media, Leona says, "My fairy tale is over. I lived a magical life with Harry." Except for the $25,000 he bequeaths to his longtime secretary, Harry Helmsley leaves his entire $1.7 billion estate to Leona. The Queen of Mean is now anointed as one of the single most dominant forces in New York City real estate. With her Prince Charming no longer at her side, Leona sets her sights on finding a new companion.
To fill the void after Harry died, she got her very famous little pooch, Trouble.
Trouble is so loved by her owner that Leona features her in the Helmsley Hotel ads.
Trouble is the perfect dog for Leona. Ill-tempered, focused, driven, and a biter.
By the 2000s, Leona is heading into her 80s, but age hasn't loosened her iron grip on her empire. She still likes to hire and fire.
She winds up finding a new partner in Patrick Ward, a man who she puts in charge of Helmsley Enterprises, and she's very happy with him until she realizes that he's gay.
Leona promptly fires Ward, who turns around and sues her.
This would not be the first time we see homophobic behavior, illegal homophobic behavior by Leona Helmsley. She fired someone because he was gay.
The Ward lawsuit is settled out of court. But then another former employee sues Leona for $9 million. The former CEO of Helmsley Enterprises contends that Leona fired him for refusing to have sex with her.
If you do not follow Leona's rules, you do not get to be at her party anymore.
But Leona comes out on top when a Manhattan judge tosses out the CEO's lawsuit as frivolous and unfounded.
I mean, I don't know if there's ever been as litigious a person as Leona Helmsley.
Nothing and nobody is off limits to Leona's queenly demands. This becomes evident in 2006 when she literally decides to raise the dead.
This woman is a piece of work. Only she can get into a fight with a cemetery.
When billionaire Leona Helmsley dies in 2007, a contentious estate battle ensues over her fortune between woman's best friend and her blood relatives.
There were billions of dollars at stake, so when someone dies, almost inevitably it creates more disputes.
But back in 2004, at the age of 84, Leona is still alive and kicking and worth more than ever. Ever since Harry's death, she's been shrewdly selling off key properties in the Helmsley portfolio, including the Empire State Building.
By the mid-2000s, Leona had added $5 billion to the $1.7 billion that Harry had left her.
But rumors circulate that Leona's health is beginning to decline. But she is quick to quash them.
The staff calls an ambulance after Leona complains of feeling faint. And Leona's longtime secretary, she calls the doctor and tells him that she's worried about Leona's mental health. The next day, the secretary was fired with no explanation.
Old age has not tempered Leona's nastiness. In 2006, she sues the Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx where her husband Harry and her son Jay are buried. Leona accuses the cemetery of becoming an eyesore. She petitions to disinter Harry and Jay's bodies and move them to a new resting place befitting a Helmsley.
She decides that she wants to move her son and Harry to a $1.4 million mausoleum that she's planning. And in order to make that kind of change, she would have needed all kinds of permits to clear ground, to cut down trees, but in typical Leona fashion, she didn't bother with permits. She just went ahead and started to do it.
In the summer of 2005, Leona's contractors strip a wooded section of the cemetery for construction. This sets off a dispute.
City officials had to come in and shut down the entire work operation and reminded Leona that even she needed to follow the legal procedures.
As a settlement, Leona pays a fine and donations are made by the Helmsley Group to repair some of the damage to the landscape. The mausoleum is completed by August 2006, and Harry and Jay's bodies are placed within. But just a year later, in 2007, Leona Helmsley dies.
At 87 years old, the Queen of Mean dies of heart failure.
Weird thing about it was how forgotten she became once the 2000s rolled around.
But not for long. When the contents of her will are revealed, the Queen of Mean is again front-page news.
Boy, the will made her live on. She used the document as a way to send messages, to dig up old grievances, to give people a piece of her mind.
Leona Helmsley leaves behind an estate ranging from $4 to $8 billion.
So the question was, who was going to inherit the billions? People were very curious, and it turned out to be kind of surprising.
Her brother Alvin receives $5 million outright and additional money in a trust with strict provisions. Specifically, he has to take care of trouble.
When you think about it, Alvin Rosenthal, Leona's brother, probably lived in his sister's shadow for his entire life, at least during the years while she was a billionaire. And you can imagine this was one act, one thing that he can do to say, you know what, Leona, no, you don't get to call this one shot. I am not taking care of trouble, and I don't care about your $15 million.
To her grandsons David and Walter Panzerer, Leona leaves a large inheritance, but only if they toe the line.
She ended up leaving $10 million to two of her grandchildren, assuming that they visited her son's grave at least once a year.
In addition to money, Alvin, Walter, and David are named co-executors of Leona's will and given control of Helmsley Enterprises and her charitable trust. But as for her two other grandchildren, Craig and Megan Panzerer, she cuts them out completely and makes sure they know it.
I don't think we ever know the reason that Leona was so angry with Craig and Megan.
And who gets the single biggest bequest in Leona Helmsley's will? Her beloved companion, Trouble.
I mean, she gave $12 million to her dog, but disinherited 2 of her grandchildren.
Fortune magazine rated this number 3 out of 101 dumbest moments in business to leave that much money to a dog.
The 2 spurned grandchildren decide to fight Trouble and the executors for their share of Leona's fortune.
Her grandchildren that were disinherited had nothing to lose by fighting the will. Sometimes in an estate, someone is given some money, and then if they try to fight the will, they're disinherited. In this case, the grandkids inherited nothing. So it really was worth their time to go to court and fight for the millions.
They challenged that Leona was not of sound mind or memory and did not have the mental capacity to make a will in 2005. The battle goes on for several months until the executors decide to settle out of court.
Ultimately, the lawyers who handled the details of the multi-billion-dollar estate were paid $100 million to settle those complex details.
The court agrees to amend the will so that the grandchildren will receive more of Leona's estate. According to sources, Craig and Megan receive a total of $6 million. In return, they consent to a confidentiality agreement, promising not to publish any personal accounts of the estate war. They also agreed to give all their personal correspondence relating to their grandmother to the estate's lawyers.
They weren't going to talk badly about her, which is kind of a big deal because you can only imagine the type of things they would have shared.
But the settlement means Trouble gets the short end of the stick.
Poor Trouble. Trouble had her inheritance reduced to $2 million from $12 million.
But no sooner has the dust settled when another estate war ignites.
What we do know is she left the bulk of her billions to a charitable trust. And in this trust, she had a mission statement specifically saying that she wanted the money to be used solely for the care and welfare of dogs.
But when Leona's trustees disregard her final wishes, 3 prominent animal rights charities start growling for money they believe is rightfully theirs.
The Humane Society and other organizations took the trustees to court, saying that they deserved some of this money.
The death of hotelier and real estate tycoon Leona Helmsley in 2007 launched a media storm. The infamous Queen of Mean left millions to her dog Trouble and nothing to 2 of her 4 grandchildren, Craig and Megan.
Trouble was at least as ill-tempered as Leona was, but Leona loved that dog, and she treated Trouble like a queen.
Megan and Craig contested the will on the grounds that Leona was not of sound mind when she wrote the will. They settle out of court with the estate administrators. Together, Megan and Craig end up receiving $6 million.
But they both had to sign a confidentiality provision so they couldn't release publicly any thoughts they had or correspondence with Leona Helmsley.
Trouble's $12 million was reduced to $2 million by a judge, and the remainder went back to the charitable trust.
Plenty of money for Trouble to live out her final days in considerable comfort, living the doggy life in Florida.
Complete with her own security team.
Trouble has her own bodyguards because she gets death threats.
She was getting like 20 to 30 death threats and kidnapping because this dog was like valuable.
But in 2009, the estate is embroiled in another dispute. Leona had left $5 billion to a charitable trust and was clear who should get it.
She left a mission statement saying that she wanted the money in the trust, billions, to be used solely for the care and welfare of dogs.
But the trustees that Leona assigned, her 2 grandsons and brother, do not agree. Instead, they disperse millions to hospitals, foundations, and the homeless, while animal rights charities only get a total of $1 million.
Dog charities like the Humane Society and other organizations took the trustees to court, saying that they deserved more.
But ultimately, a judge sides with the trustees, saying Leona just wasn't specific enough.
He said if Leona Helmsley really wanted this money to go to dog charities, she should have been explicit.
It looks like master manipulator Leona Helmsley managed to trip herself up.
The lesson to learn from this is that if you want your wishes followed, put it in clear, concise language with detailed instructions of what you want.
In 2012, it's announced that trouble is no longer. Leona's beloved Pooch dies at the age of 12 at the Helmsley Sandcastle Hotel in sunny Sarasota, Florida.
Luckily, the caretaker was able to take care of Trouble properly, given $190,000 a year.
Leona had been very clear in her will what she wanted done with Trouble's remains when the time came.
Leona Helmsley wanted Trouble buried with her. This tells you that at least she did have the capacity to love something, even if it was only a pet.
What she didn't know was that New York state law prohibits the burying of animals with humans.
And the dog was ultimately cremated.
Since 2008, Leona's trustees have been busy. To date, the charitable trust has donated billions in the areas of health, conservation, and education. But in 2014, they ask a court to adjust their fees to $100 million for all the work they have to do running a $5 billion estate.
This is unheard of.
The New York State Attorney General's office challenges the request, claiming their rate is outrageous. They determined the executors spent 15,535 hours on estate matters, making their rate a whopping $6,347 an hour.
The Attorney General ended up going to court to fight this, saying that this was excessive and exorbitant.
But by 2019, the executors win the ruling.
The judge said given the value of the state and the complexities, they had earned it.
Leona Helmsley lived her own particular version of a fairy tale. She toiled and schemed to make something of herself, married her Prince Charming, built a hotel empire, and even fought a fire-breathing dragon.
No two people were better matched for each other than Donald Trump and Leona Helmsley. It's hard to know who to pull for in that one.
They had a very similar mentality, as all people that operate at that level do.
While the Queen of Mean showed kindness to very few people, she and her husband Harry did give generously to charity, and long after her death, Leona's charitable trust continues to contribute to the city she helped to shape at the height of her celebrity.
We know that Leona Helmsley wasn't known as the nicest person. She was known as the Queen of Mean. But at the same time, she does leave billions of dollars to charity, so that says something about her.
But honestly, that did not level out the playing field.
You can love Leona Helmsley or hate her, but for her, it was important to create an image of New York as a place of prosperity. It was totally key, and she contributed mightily to that.